Okay, we're continuing our look at sustainability and economic growth, and today we're going to look at aggregate demand. So what is aggregate demand? It represents the total spending on finished final goods and services produced by a nation each year. Now, I'm hoping that sounds really familiar to you, because it is. It's the exact same thing as GDP. And now what we're going to do is we're going to represent it by an equation. So aggregate demand, or GDP, it's the same thing, equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So let's have a look at each of those components and what makes it up. Okay, C is private consumption expenditure. It's pretty much undertaken by individuals. It's their normal expenditure. They go out and they buy their groceries, they buy the TVs, they buy whatever it is. It's normal everyday household expenditure. And it represents about 60% of all spending in an economy. Many influences as to what level of consumption spending there can come down to disposable income within a household. High socio-economic areas are going to have a high amount of money to spend. Conversely, low socio-economic areas are going to have a low amount of money to spend, and are going to spend more of their money on their needs rather than their wants. Employment levels, we have whether you're employed full-time, whether you're employed part-time. Some families, one parent is full-time, the other one is part-time, sometimes both are full-time. Consumer confidence. We have a thing that if you're pretty happy with your job, you feel your job's going to continue on, you're going to keep getting pay rises, you're going to keep getting pay, you're getting paid really well, you can save some money. Well, you know what? Let's have that holiday. Conversely, if people are a bit worried about what's happening in the economy, maybe they're not getting enough money, they tend to put those things off, they tend to restrict their spending again, going back to just what their needs are rather than their wants. Loan commitments, mortgages, credit cards, all sorts of things. I recently read an article that said Australia was $21 billion worth of debt in credit cards. So all these sorts of things have an effect on how much we can go out and spend. Household saving levels. Some people live pay packet by pay packet, other people are saving for a holiday. So you know what, we're going to, for the next year or so, we'll go without a lot of things, we'll buy no-name brand products in order to save money for our holiday. Okay, so that's C, private consumption expenditure. I, private investment expenditure, and what we're looking at here is business investment. Okay, it represents 15 to 25% of all spending, can be very volatile. It has a lot to do with how the economy is, business confidence, things like that. What's it influenced by? As we said, business confidence, economic outlook, business profit levels. If the business is making a lot of money, you know what, they may decide to reinvest that money in order to increase their production or just make their business bigger. Business confidence, again, very similar to consumer confidence. If the business feels that the economy is moving well, that profits will continue or maybe increase, you know what, we may increase our investment. Okay, government spending, about 25% of total spending. Covers government consumption spending, particularly public service wages and salaries. Now, the thing with government spending, it can be broken into two groups, G1 and G2. A lot of textbooks just tend to have it as one whole group, but be aware that it can be into two groups, G1 and G2. G1, public service wages, consumption spending. Remember, G1 is consumption, therefore G2 becomes investment. So still very similar to the C and I, so just remember those breakdowns of consumption and investment. And the investment spending is our infrastructure spending, where we're going out, we're buying, we're spending it on hospitals, we're spending it on all sorts of things, we're spending government investments. There's government investment, you know, for the next 985 years trying to fix up the Western Ring Road, and they still won't fix it up properly. But that's what we're talking about here. So remember here is G1 and here is G2. But overall, quite often it's just a simple matter of just G, government spending. Influenced by many things. Population growth, some areas have huge amounts of population, and you can sort of see that with the GST in the way that Victoria and New South Wales get a higher amount of GST per person from the government than say Western Australia does based on population. Election promises, we're having an election this year, so both sides are going to come out and they're going to promise this and they're going to promise that, and we've seen recently with the Gillard government promising to increase spending in secondary schools. Okay, they are taking it away from tertiary schools, but we're going to see this. Lots and lots of election promises from both sides. The need to regulate economic fluctuations. If we know that the Reserve Bank will raise or decrease interest rates depending on what the economic conditions are or the economic outlook is. The government is the same. If the government wants to slow economic growth down a little bit, you know what, they may raise some taxes or just slow their spending down. If they feel that we need to bump up, get the economy moving along, they may increase their spending. X minus M, net exports. Difference between the value of goods and services exported and imported. X stands for exports, strangely enough, I know that's difficult, and M, believe it or not, stands for imports. Imports are taken off because they are not produced in this country and therefore are part of somebody else's GDP. Influenced by all sorts of things, world economic conditions. We saw during the global financial crisis a drop in exports out of Australia because areas like America, who import so many goods and services, simply stop buying or slow their buying down. So economic conditions of trading countries, political conditions of trading countries, all these sorts of things can have an effect on exports, imports. We've just done a deal with the Chinese, a trade deal. So it's going to be interesting to see how all these things work out. Okay, so each component is interrelated. So for an example, an income tax cut, the government steps in and they have an income tax cut that leads to increased disposable income. In similar, they did last year when the carbon tax came in, they increased the tax-free threshold from $6,000 to $18,200. So a lot of people there that were in that 16,000 bracket, well, now they've got tax-free money. They've now got an increased amount of disposable income. So we have an income tax cut leads to increased disposable income. Consumers decide, you know what, I've got a bit extra money, I'm going to go and buy a new car. So that's increased private consumption, isn't it? Yes, of course it is. It was a rhetorical question. I didn't really expect you to answer me. Car manufacturers will now supply more cars because people are buying cars because of the increased disposable income. So that's increased private investment, which is our I component. Now, possibly people may then decide, well, government, they're going to have more cars, so government is going to spend more money on roads. So that's government spending increasing because they know that there's more roads, or there's more of a demand for roads now. People may decide that, you know what, instead of just buying Ford or Holdens, I might look overseas. I might want to buy that little Hyundai or whatever. So some consumers may decide to buy imported cars. On that, we maybe have our local car manufacturers have increased their production. Here, they increased their production, their private investment, because they expected people to buy more cars. So they've increased their production. What's happened though is some people are buying cars overseas. So maybe our car manufacturers here may actually have an excess of stock or a surplus of stock. So they may now look to get rid of that stock overseas, and that can increase our exports. Okay, so see how one small thing, an income tax cut, can, I know it's an extreme example, but just know that each area there can be interrelated in some way, shape or form. Okay, so a further effect of increased consumer spending is lower unemployment, because if everything goes up, businesses are doing well, businesses tend to expand, they want to employ more people. And demand for other goods and services increases. Right, good economic governments understand the importance of these connections, and it'll be nice one day when we finally get one. If an economy is experiencing weak growth or recession, governments will implement programs aimed at stimulating aggregate demand. Now, don't get caught up in the fact that if you get asked in an exam, oh, what can a government do to stimulate demand? Don't say a stimulus package, because I've tried to explain to my class, I'm nearly 50 years old and there's only ever been one. So that's an extreme example. What you do is you talk about things like increase their infrastructure spending, reduce taxes, increase taxes, things like that. But don't just write in, oh, a stimulus package. It was a once-off thing out of nowhere. In times of high growth, governments will implement programs aimed at slowing aggregate demand, and that could be slowing their spending, increasing taxes, or with the help of the RBA, increasing interest rates. Right, so just a simple recap. Know this equation on what each component is. AD, or GDP, equals consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, export spending, and again taking off imports because those goods are produced overseas. Okie dokie. Next one we'll move on to aggregate supply.